"You're not going to believe this, but I'm expecting your husband's child," Jessica whispered across the table as the silverware clinked softly and the aroma of roast chicken filled the air. Martha froze mid-breath, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the polished oak table, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in her pale blue eyes. The room felt suddenly smaller, the laughter and chatter of the family dinner fading to a dull hum, the warmth of the overhead chandelier unable to reach the chill creeping up her spine. Across from her, Ethan, her son, shifted uneasily in his chair, his fork tapping against his plate, the rhythmic sound only intensifying the tension she felt. She took a deliberate sip of her water, allowing the silence to stretch for a few seconds longer than necessary, noticing the careful way Jessica avoided her gaze while speaking, the faint curl of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Martha's mind raced, recollections of the past weeks and months surfacing in fragments. The unexplained absences, the sudden trips, the whispered phone calls in corners, and the subtle changes in Ethan's demeanor. Each memory layered upon the last, building a pattern she had chosen to ignore until now, and the realization that this was intentional settled heavily in her chest. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself, keeping her expression neutral, feeling the familiar pang of betrayal tighten in her stomach. The soft hum of conversation resumed around them, a distant soundtrack to the storm she quietly endured, the clatter of plates and murmurs of small talk a stark contrast to the upheaval inside her. Martha's gaze drifted to the tablecloth, the gentle folds of cream-colored linen under the warm candlelight, and she noticed the tiny imperfection she had never seen before, a metaphor perhaps for the subtle cracks that had appeared in her family over time. She remembered the care she had taken to prepare this dinner, the shopping, the peeling and chopping of vegetables, the marinating of chicken with her favorite herbs, the thought of bringing everyone together with a meal, a gesture of love that now seemed inconsequential. Her heart beat steadily, not with panic but with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each pulse a reminder that she remained in control even as the world she thought she knew tilted around her. Martha leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing her arms in a protective manner, eyes narrowing just enough to signal she understood the stakes without revealing the full extent of her awareness. Jessica's whisper had landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples of uncertainty across the dinner table. Yet Martha's surface remained calm, a quiet reservoir of strength. Ethan's furtive glances and Jessica's careful posture hinted at secrets that Martha would now piece together. Observing with the patience of someone who had seen years of family dynamics, power plays, and quiet manipulations. Every subtle movement, every half-smile, every carefully chosen word became a clue in the puzzle, a testament to the silent observation Martha had perfected over decades. She allowed herself one slow, deliberate sip of her wine, the cool taste grounding her in the present, reinforcing that she would not react impulsively, that her mind was already formulating the steps she would take to navigate this revelation. The flicker of the candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room, highlighting the familiar portraits on the walls, the family memories captured in frames that had witnessed countless gatherings, each now reframed in the context of betrayal. Martha's lips pressed together, a faint crease forming at the corner, signaling the calm before the storm, a poised acknowledgement that she understood the depth of the deception, and that the evening was only the beginning of a journey she would approach with measured determination rather than anger. In this quiet, suspended moment, with the scent of herbs and roasted meat mingling in the air, Martha assessed the situation fully, aware of the undercurrents that had led to this revelation, noting the dynamics, the alliances and the tensions, ready to move forward with careful observation and deliberate intent, ensuring that every next step would be informed, precise and unhurried, a silent testament to her resilience and the quiet power she wielded even in the face of shocking betrayal. The room settled into a quiet tension as Martha carefully folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate, her fingers lingering on the smooth linen for a moment before she lifted them away. She studied the small movements around her, the way Ethan cleared his throat every few seconds, the subtle tapping of his knife against the plate, a rhythm that mirrored the unease in the air. Jessica, seated across from him, had returned to her salad, cutting the greens with methodical precision, her expression calm but eyes darting subtly toward Martha whenever she thought she was not looking. Martha's gaze traveled to the wine glasses, noticing the condensation from the chilled Chardonnay, reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier above, and she allowed herself a small inhale to steady her thoughts. The weight of the revelation was not outwardly displayed. Her posture remained upright, her movements deliberate, a picture of composure despite the storm inside. She traced the rim of her glass absent-mindedly, each rotation a meditation, letting the clinks of silverware and quiet murmurs of conversation act as a distant soundtrack while she processed the implications. Memories surfaced without invitation. Ethan as a child running across the living room, laughing uncontrollably, his small hands clinging to hers. The quiet evenings when she and her husband prepared dinners together for family gatherings. The years of guidance, reassurance, and encouragement she had offered. Each memory added weight. The realization that her attentions and love were now being overshadowed by deceit subtly folding into her awareness. She noticed how Jessica's posture had shifted slightly, a small tightening at the shoulders, a minuscule curl of the lips as though to contain a smile, and she catalogued these signals silently, like pieces of a puzzle forming a broader picture. The soft hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath chairs moving filled the pauses in conversation, and Martha let her ears catch every inflection, every hesitant tone, building a map of intentions and unsaid words. She reflected on the careful choices she had made. That evening, the baked rolls on the side lightly brushed with butter, the roasted vegetables seasoned perfectly, the chicken resting on a wooden cutting board, sliced and ready to serve. The effort was tangible, a silent statement of care and love, contrasting sharply with the atmosphere of avoidance and hidden motives that now dominated the dinner. Martha's breathing remained even, measured, and each exhale carried away any impulse toward confrontation. She understood that patience would serve her more than immediate reaction. Her eyes lingered on Ethan's hand briefly, noting the slight tremor when he picked up his glass, a subtle sign of internal conflict she recognized from years of observing human behavior. The faint clinking of the silverware against plates and the soft, subdued murmur of conversation became markers, guiding her understanding of the dynamics at play, and she quietly planned the observations and questions she would pursue after this meal concluded. Throughout the silence that felt heavy yet controlled, Martha's mind traced strategies, analyzing motives without bias, allowing each subtle gesture to inform the narrative she was piecing together, aware that control and calm would reveal the truth more effectively than anger or immediate reaction. And as she set her fork down with deliberate care, she felt a renewed sense of focus, a calm determination to navigate the complexities of her family evening, while maintaining dignity and the quiet authority she had carried through decades of experience. As the dinner continued, Martha observed each subtle interaction, the way Jessica shifted her chair slightly closer to Ethan, the faint inclination of her head when she responded to his comments, and the careful modulation of her voice as if measuring its impact. Martha's gaze traced the contours of the table, noting the polished silverware and the way the candlelight danced across the crystal glasses, yet she allowed these observations to coexist with the sharper images forming in her mind of past interactions, the small manipulations, the strategically timed requests, the casual remarks that now revealed intent. Ethan sipped his water, glancing at Martha with an expression that was at once apologetic and uncertain, the lines around his eyes deepening with tension, and Martha noted the subtle signs of discomfort, cataloging them with the precision of someone long practiced in reading human behavior. She reflected on the morning she had prepared breakfast for him, the afternoon spent assisting with homework, and the evening she had listened to his troubles, and the contrast between those memories and the current situation sharpened her awareness of the distance that had grown between them. Jessica reached for a bread roll, her movements smooth, controlled, and calculated, and Martha felt the quiet pulse of strategy behind each action, each pause, each carefully measured word. She allowed herself a mental inventory of the evening, noting the temperature of the room, the pattern of conversation, the subtle shifts in seating posture, and the interplay of glances and silences. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creak of floorboards punctuated the pauses, giving rhythm to the observation, while Martha's internal dialogue connected the dots without haste, weighing the significance of each gesture. Memories of shared holidays, birthday celebrations, and family milestones flickered in her mind, contrasted now by a pervasive sense of manipulation, and she catalogued these memories not with anger, but with analytical clarity. The way Jessica laughed lightly at Ethan's jokes, the way she adjusted the table setting as if asserting control over the environment, each detail reinforced Martha's perception of calculated behavior. She noted the timing of questions, the manner of responses, and the slight tension in Ethan's jaw as he navigated the duality of loyalty and obligation. And in this quiet observation, Martha reinforced her resolve to approach the situation with strategic thought rather than emotional reaction. The room's ambient sounds, the subtle clatter of cutlery, the distant hum of traffic outside, the muted flicker of the chandelier, formed a backdrop against which Martha processed every signal, constructing a detailed map of intention and potential outcomes. She adjusted her posture slightly, maintaining a calm exterior while her mind parsed possibilities, evaluated risks, and silently planned for the conversations and observations that would follow after the dinner, ensuring that each step would be deliberate and informed. The light from the candles caught the glint of a fork in front of Jessica, and Martha allowed a small, deliberate pause before taking another sip of water, each gesture measured and unhurried, reinforcing the quiet authority she maintained over her thoughts and the perception of her composure. In the subdued hum of the dining room, Martha cataloged the dynamics, internalized the patterns, and maintained a vigilant calm, her focus unwavering as she prepared to navigate the delicate social terrain with precision, clarity, and measured patience, understanding that knowledge and observation would be her strongest allies as the evening unfolded. As the conversation at the table continued, Martha allowed her gaze to drift toward the window where the evening sunlight filtered through half-open blinds, casting stripes of light across the carpeted floor. She noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way Jessica leaned slightly forward, hands clasped as if seeking reassurance or control, and Ethan's shoulders tensed momentarily before he relaxed into his chair. Martha reflected on the family dinners of years past. The warmth that once accompanied shared stories and laughter now replaced by a careful, measured exchange of words that carried hidden intentions. She remembered preparing the table, setting each plate with attention, polishing the silverware until it reflected the candlelight, choosing napkins and glasses with care, all gestures once unnoticed but now heavy with significance. Her thoughts wandered to the holidays and birthdays, the countless moments when she had orchestrated family gatherings, ensuring everyone felt included and valued, and she contrasted these memories with the subtle manipulation she now observed, the way Jessica directed conversations and positioned herself strategically, and Ethan's reluctance to challenge her wife. Martha's breathing remained steady, each inhale and exhale a metronome grounding her. Awareness in the present moment, allowing her to observe without judgment, to note every slight inflection, every hesitant glance, every careful pause. She considered the meaning behind gestures. A hand brushing a napkin, the tilt of a head, a careful smile masking a thought, and recorded them in her mind with the precision of someone trained in reading subtle cues. The soft clink of silverware and the quiet hum of the refrigerator punctuated the conversation, providing a rhythm that contrasted with the undercurrents of tension at the table. Martha's reflections turned to Ethan, recalling his childhood exuberance, his laughter ringing through hallways, his dependence on her guidance, and the contrast with his current restraint, the polite nods and the careful avoidance of conflict, signaling the quiet influence of his spouse. She observed Jessica's posture, noting the calculated elegance in her movements, the measured way she engaged in discussion, and the minimal gestures that carried disproportionate weight in the dynamics of the evening. Martha allowed herself to feel the sting of recognition, not as anger but as clarity, a deep understanding of the patterns that had been at work, shaping the interactions, influencing decisions, and altering the warmth that had once been the hallmark of family gatherings. She watched Ethan's hands, the subtle clenching of fingers, the momentary hesitation in response to a question, and saw the tension underlying his polite demeanor, an indication of unspoken conflicts and loyalties divided between wife and mother. Martha let her eyes follow Jessica's every movement, the careful placement of utensils, the manner of speaking, the tiny pauses that hinted at intention, and she cataloged these details silently, preparing for the analysis and decisions that would follow. The evening's ambience, the muted lighting, the gentle flicker of candles, the faint rustle of clothing, served as a backdrop for her contemplation, each element observed and integrated into a broader understanding of the social landscape, the alliances and undercurrents shaping the family, and she embraced a calm, deliberate awareness that would guide her actions. Beyond this dinner, after carefully observing the interactions at the dinner table, Martha allowed herself a subtle shift in focus, noticing small details she had not fully appreciated before, the way Jessica's hand lingered on the edge of the table, the slight adjustment of Ethan's chair as he leaned closer to his wife, the measured pauses in conversation that seemed orchestrated to control the flow of attention. Martha reflected on the countless family events she had arranged, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the school recitals, and the quiet moments when she had offered guidance, comfort, and support to both her son and his wife, and she contrasted these memories with the present, recognizing patterns of manipulation and omission that had grown over time. She traced the lighting across the room, the way the candle flames danced gently on the polished surfaces, the shadows shifting subtly as the evening progressed, and she allowed these observations to anchor her calm presence while her mind processed the complexity of the situation. Martha's eyes met Ethan's briefly, noting the fleeting hesitation and the subtle tension in his posture, and she registered that his unease mirrored the underlying conflict between loyalty to his mother and the influence of his spouse. She observed Jessica's careful control of tone and expression, the slight tightening of her jaw when responding to a question, the deliberate pacing of her speech, and Martha cataloged these signs as part of a broader understanding of the family dynamics at play. The faint hum of the dishwasher in the background and the occasional clink of utensils became markers of the rhythm of the evening, guiding Martha's awareness as she assessed the relationships and interactions around her, recognizing the strategic placement of gestures and glances that subtly directed attention and perception. Martha's thoughts drifted to her own reactions, considering how she had learned over decades to maintain composure in challenging situations, to observe quietly, and to let insight accumulate before taking action. She noted the contrast between the warmth of past gatherings and the controlled, measured interaction, now appreciating the subtle power that came from knowledge and awareness. Each element, the sound of soft laughter, the careful arrangement of plates and glasses, the nuanced exchange of words, became part of a mental map Martha was constructing, understanding who held influence, who sought approval, and who navigated the delicate balance between truth and appearance. She felt the strength in her quiet observation, the clarity in her deliberate attention, and the patience in allowing the evening to unfold naturally while she prepared to gather further insight, recognizing that the most effective response would come not from immediate confrontation but from careful, informed action. With each subtle movement she noticed, Martha reinforced her internal calm, grounding herself in observation, allowing the dynamics to reveal themselves in layers, and cultivating a perspective that balanced emotional intelligence with strategic awareness, knowing that her measured approach would serve as the foundation for the decisions and responses she would make once the evening drew to a close. As the evening progressed, Martha continued to maintain her composed demeanor while her mind worked meticulously, observing and interpreting every subtle gesture, glance, and inflection in the voices of her son and daughter-in-law. The soft glow from the chandelier highlighted the delicate patterns on the tablecloth, the polished silverware reflecting the light in a way that mirrored the careful scrutiny she applied to the unfolding dynamics. She noted Ethan's hands resting briefly on the table, his fingers curling slightly before releasing, a subtle tension betraying his discomfort, and Jessica's deliberate way of adjusting her posture, leaning forward just enough to appear engaged without revealing her intent. Martha allowed herself a slow, measured sip of wine, feeling the cool liquid anchor her in the present as she cataloged the patterns and behaviors that had become more apparent with each passing minute. Memories of years spent nurturing, guiding, and supporting her family surfaced in quiet contrast to the current situation, highlighting the disparity between past intentions and present manipulations. She reflected on the countless hours spent preparing meals, organizing family events, and listening patiently to concerns that now seemed trivial in light of the underlying currents she was discovering. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional scrape of a chair, and the distant sound of traffic outside became part of the rhythm that guided her observations, each sound marking a moment in which Martha registered subtle clues about motives and alliances. She observed Ethan's slight hesitation when speaking, the careful modulation of his tone, and the microexpressions that betrayed conflicted loyalties, noting how these signals interacted with Jessica's calculated movements and measured responses. Martha's thoughts extended to the layout of the room, the spatial relationships between the participants, and how positioning influenced the flow of conversation, reinforcing her awareness of psychological dynamics at play. She cataloged each element, gestures, pauses, expressions, and inflections, into a mental framework that would inform her decisions, understanding that the quiet accumulation of evidence and insight was more powerful than any immediate confrontation. The evening's ambience, from the flicker of candlelight across glassware to the soft rustle of napkins, created a serene backdrop that contrasted with the inner complexity Martha navigated, allowing her to move with intentionality and precision. She allowed her attention to return momentarily to the details of the meal, noting the care in seasoning, the presentation of each dish, and the subtle ways these efforts could influence perceptions, while keeping her focus on the interactions and subtle power plays unfolding across the table. Martha's calm exterior served as both shield and tool, preserving her dignity while providing the space for strategic observation, enabling her to recognize patterns, anticipate reactions, and mentally prepare the next steps in addressing the situation thoughtfully and deliberately without revealing the depth of her understanding. With the final course of the meal approaching, Martha's attention sharpened even further, her observations picking up subtle nuances she had not noticed earlier. The quiet hum of the dining room, punctuated by the soft scraping of chairs and the occasional clink of cutlery, created an almost meditative backdrop against which she traced every glance and gesture. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes darting momentarily toward Jessica before returning to his plate, a flicker of unease betraying the effort to maintain composure. Martha's gaze lingered on Jessica, noting the careful way she adjusted the folds of her dress, the measured tilt of her head, and the faint curl of a smile that seemed designed to assert control while remaining innocuous. Each motion, each expression, became a piece of the intricate puzzle Martha was silently assembling, an understanding of intention and influence that no one else in the room seemed aware she was mapping. She reflected on her own movements, the deliberate placement of her hands, the even pacing of her breath, and the subtle shifts in posture that conveyed calm authority without revealing the inner calculation. The soft glow of the chandelier cast elongated shadows across the table, highlighting the polished silverware and glinting glasses, each reflection a reminder of the careful attention she had paid to detail over the years in preparing her home and her family for such gatherings. Memories of long evenings spent nurturing and guiding her children surfaced briefly, contrasted against the current scene where dialogue was carefully measured, smiles were strategic, and silences carried weight. Martha allowed herself a quiet, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement toward the subtle cues she had gathered, recognizing Ethan's discomfort and Jessica's poised manipulation as pieces she would later interpret in context. The aroma of roasted vegetables and warm bread mingled in the air, grounding her awareness while reinforcing the contrast between the care she had put into the meal and the underlying tensions present in the room. She observed the gentle rise and fall of conversation, the calculated pauses, and the fleeting exchanges of eye contact, mentally noting the dynamics of control, alliance, and restraint. Each observation was filed carefully, contributing to the broader understanding of relationships and loyalties, ensuring that Martha remained poised and deliberate. The quiet movement of air from the partially open window shifted papers slightly and rustled the folds of napkins, subtle reminders of the environment she controlled with her awareness and attentiveness. Martha's internal clarity provided a steadying presence against the undercurrent of manipulation, allowing her to parse intention from demeanor, the whispered subtext of dialogue from the literal words spoken. She reflected on the value of patience, noting how each measured interaction could reveal more than any overt confrontation, and she adjusted her posture just enough to project calm, while mentally preparing for the next steps in her careful navigation of this family dynamic. In the quiet culmination of this evening's meal, every minor detail, every careful gesture, and every shadowed glance contributed to a comprehensive understanding Martha was quietly building, a framework of insight and strategic foresight she would rely upon in the moments to follow. The dessert plates had been cleared, and the soft murmur of post-meal conversation filled the room, yet Martha remained poised, her attention unwavering, tracing each subtle movement and expression of her family with meticulous care. She noticed how Ethan fidgeted slightly, his fingers drumming lightly on the table edge, eyes occasionally flicking toward Jessica, who in turn maintained her controlled composure, carefully aligning her cutlery and leaning subtly to guide attention toward herself. Martha's gaze swept over the table arrangement, the polished surface reflecting the candlelight and the final glimmers of evening sunlight filtering through the blinds, creating a pattern of light and shadow that mirrored the complex interplay of intentions around her. She reflected on the countless meals she had prepared over decades, each ingredient chosen with care, each setting meticulously arranged, and how these gestures had once fostered connection and warmth, now serving as a backdrop to the delicate tension that permeated the room. Martha's thoughts turned inward, reviewing the conversations, the half-smiles, the controlled gestures, and the subtle inflections of voice, recognizing the patterns of influence and hesitation that revealed more than spoken words ever could. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of floorboards, and the quiet clinking of glass became part of a rhythm that guided her observation, each sound marking a moment to register nuance and intent. She noted the slight flush in Ethan's cheeks when Jessica spoke, the micro-adjustments of her posture, and the careful way she chose her words, all evidence of an intricate social navigation, and Martha filed each observation with deliberate precision. Memories of holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, and quiet evenings of shared stories surfaced, contrasted against the current dynamic where every gesture seemed calculated and measured, reinforcing her awareness of the strategic interplay unfolding before her. Martha's breathing remained calm and steady, each inhale and exhale anchoring her in the present while her mind cataloged the subtle signals, assessing potential motivations and the silent exchanges occurring between glances and gestures. She allowed her eyes to linger on the way Jessica's hand rested lightly on her wine glass, the delicate tension in her fingers suggesting unspoken considerations, and she noted Ethan's responsive hesitation, the subtle dialogue of body language conveying as much as any conversation. The room's ambient light shifted with the evening, the candle flames dancing faintly across reflective surfaces, and Martha's observations took in the entirety of the space, the arrangement, the positioning, and the interplay of presence and silence, building a comprehensive understanding of the family dynamics. In these quiet, deliberate moments, she maintained her composed exterior, allowing no outward indication of the analytical process within, observing with patience, and noting each small act, inflection, and reaction, storing insight for the careful, measured responses she would execute as the evening drew to a close, fully aware that perception and strategic patience were her strongest assets in navigating the delicate terrain of familial tension and hidden agendas. As the evening drew to a close, Martha allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on the careful observations she had made throughout the dinner. She noted the subtle shifts in energy around the table, the quiet tension that persisted despite the polite conversation, and the polite smiles exchanged. Ethan leaned back in his chair, glancing toward Jessica with an expression that suggested unease mingled with resignation, while Jessica herself maintained a controlled poise, carefully choosing each word, each gesture, and each inflection to shape the narrative of the evening. Martha traced the soft shadows cast by the remaining candlelight, the way the polished surfaces reflected the dim glow, and she allowed these details to anchor her calm exterior, reminding herself that patience and observation were her allies. Memories of shared moments, long conversations, and countless family gatherings surfaced in her mind, highlighting the contrast between the warmth of past connections and the subtle manipulations she now discerned. She noticed Ethan's hands resting lightly on the table, the way his fingers flexed and released in a rhythm of internal contemplation, and she cataloged these cues silently, aware that every small motion, glance, and pause conveyed more than words could express. The soft clatter of dessert utensils and the quiet hum of the heating system became markers of the passing time, giving rhythm to her analysis and reinforcing her awareness of the dynamics at play. Martha considered the layers of interaction, noting how Jessica guided attention toward herself, how Ethan navigated the dual pressures of loyalty and expectation, and how the room itself, with its carefully arranged table, lighting, and spatial relationships, contributed to the subtle orchestration of the evening. Each observation was absorbed, analyzed, and stored within Martha's mental framework, allowing her to maintain a composed exterior while understanding the underlying intentions. She reflected on the cumulative insights gathered, recognizing patterns of behavior, unspoken alliances, and subtle strategies, and she appreciated the value of measured response over impulsive reaction. The faint glow of the remaining candles highlighted the contours of her hands and the gentle folds of the tablecloth, serving as a visual reminder of the care she had invested in creating a welcoming environment, even as she navigated the complexities of this delicate social situation. Martha's breathing remained even, steady, and deliberate, each inhale and exhale reinforcing her focus and grounding her presence as she prepared for the moments to come. She observed the interplay of glances, the microexpressions that revealed hesitation, concern, or strategic calculation, and she cataloged them methodically, aware that the knowledge she gathered would inform her next steps. In the quiet aftermath of the evening, with the soft ambient sounds of the household as a backdrop, Martha maintained a poised and deliberate stance, balancing observation with composure, insight with restraint, and patience with readiness, fully attuned to the undercurrents of her family dynamics and prepared to act with clarity and precision when the time was right.